Hi, this is Martin and welcome to this next video in which I'm looking at getting started with OpenInsight. Before I get started, I had an email from somebody overnight asking about the number of theory lessons that I'm planning. That got me thinking, and I've put together this little schedule of the videos that I'm expecting to put together for this video series. I can't see me doing any less, but I might be dropping one or two new ones in there. But basically what we're looking at is the lesson number, the title of the lesson, whether it's been produced or not, and whether I think it's a theory or a practical lesson. Now, some of the theory lessons may well have some settings in or something that you might want to change in your copy of OpenInsight. So my advice would be to watch them. But if, like the person that emailed me, if you just want to dive straight in and learn as you go along, then you could just look at the practical lessons that we're doing. I tend to like to know a little bit about the tool that I'm working with, so I prefer the theory, and that's the reason why I've thrown that in. So today we're going to be looking at buttons, which is a theory lesson. So if you want to jump forward, feel free. If not, go and grab a coffee or a cup of tea, pull your chair up and enjoy this video. Right, so let's launch OpenInsight. And I've created a small form in OI, just a test form. And what I want to do very quickly is talk about the differences between the old way and the new way of creating buttons. So if you've come up from an early version of OpenInsight, this will give you a bit of background. If you are new to OpenInsight, you can forget this and jump forward the next minute or two. I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. Okay, so in version 9 and prior, to create a 3-state button, and you could have multiple states, you needed to create a single graphic with 3 parts. So in this particular graphic here, we have a template with a blue, orange and grey background, and then an individual file. So in this instance, it's a cross for delete, or it might be a floppy disk for a save, and a plain document for a clear, whatever you want to have. And you had to drop the graphic on in the right place, and then if you wanted the button to actually drop into the form when the user clicked it, you needed to then adjust the graphics accordingly. And then if you wanted to have text on your button, it was even worse, because you had to manage the graphic placement for normal and clicked, and then you had to manage the text placement for normal and clicked. And of course the text is variable length, so how do you get it in the middle? And then what happens if your text is too wide for the button? So there was lots of compromises, lots of aggravation. I did do a video on how I create my buttons because so many people got really head up about the process, and that's why a lot of OpenInsight, early OpenInsight applications just have normal buttons with text on them, whereas in the Windows world we like to have lots of pretty pictures and graphics. So fast forward to OpenInsight 10, and thankfully everything has got a bazillion times easier. So if we just grab a push button and we drop it onto our form, we'll rename it, because I rename all of my files to btn for button underscore whatever the button is going to be called. And in this instance I'm going to change the text to delete, because it's a delete button. Now if we test run that, no code, just a straightforward couple of properties have changed. When the form renders, we get our grey button. When we mouse over, it changes to its mouse over state, which is a light blue with a single pixel light blue or darker blue border. And then if we click it, we get a third state where it goes darker with a darker background. Now all of that is done with no code. OpenInsight 10 takes care of everything for you. So if we want to replicate this button at the top here, what we'll do is we'll get rid of the text. We will set the size to 24. We'll then come down to our images and we will drop on an image. We've got lots of different options. It's going to be a PNG image. And within OpenInsight, you've got a number of system images that you can use. Now I've just got those two old images defined at the moment with my MPs here, which are not the images that I want. So it's cancel out of here for the moment, and I'm going to go to my File Explorer. I'm actually going to open up a second instance of the File Explorer. And in this right hand side one, I'm going to navigate to where my OpenInsight is installed. And my folder where I'm keeping all of my application specific files. I've got a new folder in here called Images, and under Images I've got one called Buttons. That's got the two old buttons in here. Now I'm lucky at Sprezzatura in that I've got access to the Icon Experience library of images. It's a fantastic library. And if I open up Experience 2, you'll see that I've got ICO, icons, and PNGs. So those are two different file types I tend to work with. And there are hundreds of icons, and there are hundreds of matching PNGs. And within PNG, you've got different sizes of image as well. So for this button, I'm going to want a 16 by 16 image. I've only got the option for plain in here, and the image that I want is delete. So if I just come down to delete, there we go. I will copy and paste that into my buttons folder. So go paste. And because that is a 16 by 16 graphic, my naming convention says name it 16 underscore delete and then PNG. Now the other thing that I'm going to want to do, and this will become clear in a moment, is we just navigate back to where that folder is. I just lost my way there for a moment. And with PNG, this time I'm going to go for a 32 by 32 image, and I've actually got the option for a shadow. Let's just go for a shadow one this time. Again, I want to have the delete button, and again we'll copy and paste that in, and this time we're going to set that to 32 underscore. So that's our 32 by 32 image. So once we've got our images in here, we can close out. And image libraries are really useful. Now, we can't drop the image on because at the moment, if I go to my images, the image still is not going to show in here because we haven't created the image. So if we go to the Start button and we go to New and we go to Image Components, we'll see that there are a number of image components that we can create in OpenInsight 10. We've got bitmaps, we've got icons, JPEGs, PNGs, and we've got image lists. Image lists are simply one image with lots of different images, and then within code you decide which of the images you want to display. Much in the same way as when I was talking about the OpenInsight 9 stuff. Now I'm going to keep it easy during the tutorial, and we're just going to work with PNG files and icon files. So for the moment I'm just interested in a PNG file because that's the one that we've copied in. So if we go OK to that, we then have a number of options, and this is where our file sizing comes in. So you're almost definitely going to want a graphic to render on screen when your user is running at 100% DPI. And that graphic that we're going to use is our 16 underscore delete PNG file. Now I'm running at 200% on my machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an image that's twice as big, or 4 times the area, but basically it's twice the length and the height, or the width and the height, I should say. So what happens now is I have got 2 paths to image files for this entity that I'm going to save in OpenInsight. And OI is clever because if I'm running at 100% DPI, it will use this image file to render the button. If I'm running at 200% DPI, OpenInsight will automatically use this file to render the button. And it will always go to the closest button that is defined, or graphic that is defined in OpenInsight. So if I was running at 175 DPI, it's going to use 32 graphic. If I'm running at 125, it's going to use a smaller one. So you really need to think about the graphics and which, whether you're just going to use 100 or whether you're going to use different ones. Now, what will happen is, if the system scales up, the images can become blurred. If you've got multiple sizes defined in here and it's jumping to the one closest to the DPI that you are running, you're going to have a much crisper image. Now, just for the moment, I'm just going to run, I'm going to keep it easy during the tutorial, I'm just going to run with a single 100%. So regardless of what resolution my users are running at, it's going to use that 16 image file. It just means I haven't got to create lots and lots of different image files. So when we're happy, we can go File and Save, or you can right mouse click on the tab here and we'll do a save. And I have a naming convention. MP brings all of my entities together. PNG, which tells me it's a PNG file, the size, and then the unique name. So once we're happy, we'll click OK, and then we can just close out of there. Now, if we go to our image, we're now going to have that image available to us in OpenInsight, and we can set that to centered. OK that, and if we test run the form, we then get a button which doesn't really look much like a button, and when we click it, we get a very faint line around it. That's great, but it's not brilliant, and that's the wrong way to actually handle buttons in OpenInsight 10. But I just wanted to show that that is one way that you could do a button if you want. So let's take that graphic off, and this time we're going to be looking at Glyph, this little section called Glyph. So under Glyph, we can navigate to the file that we want to use, the graphics file that we want to use. Again, we're going to set it to centered, and we'll click OK. And this time when we test run the form, we get a button that renders with a border on it, so it now looks like a button. And as we mouse over, we get the border, and if we click it, then it goes darker. All of that is done with no code. Now, if you want to have this style of button, but you don't necessarily want the border around it, you can change the flat property to true. And I do use this in some of my applications, particularly where this graphic is next to an edit line. It now renders on the screen with no border or anything, but as the mouse comes over, you get the nice blue background on it. And if you mouse down, then it behaves like a button. So if you do want to have flat buttons, then it's simply the flat property that you need to set to true. I've set mine back for the moment. So that's our button without text. What happens if we want to do a button with text? Well, let's add some text in here called delete. And while we're here, I'm going to add a tooltip. So the tooltip, the title will be delete, and the text is going to be delete this record. So this is just some help text for our user. So we can set an icon. I've set this to information, and the style to balloon style. It's your choice on what you want to do. So if we click OK there, and now we're going to need to resize. I can either drag the button across, or I can manually set the width if I want to. Entirely up to me. And now we've got that same button with the graphic and the text nicely laid out. And if the text was going to be longer, I could simply make the button wider. Now, if I was to look at the Glyph properties again, you'll see that we've got Glyph text layout. What we can do in here is we can leave the image to the left of the button, or we can put it to the top. So we've got different styles of buttons now. And we often see this in later versions of Microsoft Office, for instance. We can put it to the right. We can put it on the bottom. We can pretty much put it wherever we want. So that's a Glyph button. Now that, for me, is great to a point. If I take a copy of this button, and we'll just paste it onto here. If I'm going to have my buttons side by side, So let's just change this one to be save. Everything looks fine. Everything's hunky-dory. However, if I bring the buttons underneath each other, now for me, I think that looks a little bit untidy because the graphics aren't lined up. The text is fine, but the graphics aren't lined up. So there's something else that we can do here. So if I just grab these buttons and we'll do a Control C and a Control V, and we'll just move them over. And I'm going to stick with the same graphic. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them. I'm going to remove the glyph image. And I'm going to scroll down to split button. And I'm going to create this as a left split button. Now when you do that, OpenInsight will automatically give you a little drop down graphic. But you can actually override that by putting your own graphic in there. So I'm going to drop the delete graphic, the same one that we've been using all along, into there. And you can set the split width if you want, so 30, which will just size it a little bit nicer. Or you can get rid of the split separator if you want. And now my button is nicely aligned with my text centralized and my graphics one under the other. Now there is one thing to bear in mind if you do this. If you have a standard non-split button, the events that you will use will be the straight click event. If you use the split button, then you'll be using the click and the drop down event, because depending on whether you click on the main part of the button or whether you click on the actual image, and it may well be that you've got another split on, it will run different events. So one will run the click event and one will run the drop down event, and I can't for the life of me for the moment remember which way around it is. We'll probably get to that a little bit later. But you can see how very quickly and easily now you can create really nice looking buttons with some nice functionality with no code in moments, whereas the old way you used to be spending quite a bit of time creating and managing graphics. Anyway, that's it for this video. Hopefully you found it useful, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take care. Bye bye.